Hello everybody, my name is Jeff Arbuckle and this is B-Movie Enema. Now, as your friendly B-movie proctologist, I'm constantly here at the edge of the great gaping maw of the filmmaking butthole, presenting you with the bizarre, the forgotten, the little-known movies of decades gone by. Now, normally when I go down to the orifice that I sit guarding, I can't say I always know what's coming. However, what I haven't done yet in this first season is to kind of do one that's specifically for me.
Oh no. No one can ever say you are a selfish person.
By the way, that's my very lovely and very flatteringly truthful companion, Nurse Disembodied. Now, she knows that I care. In the deepest hearts of all hearts, I'm here to give you entertainment by way of watching these movies with you.
Yeah, right.
What?
Nothing. I'm just saying that, yeah, you are right.
Anyway, I rarely ask for anything from you viewers, other than maybe to go to the website www.bmovieenema.com, maybe subscribe to this channel. If you want to smash that fucking like button and ring that shit-sucking bell to be notified of episodes when they come out, I mean, that's cool and whatnot, but, you know, I don't really ask for all that much. So, is it fair for me to say that I want to watch a movie that isn't pre-selected by the gastrointestinal colon of a movie poop shoot? I think so. I mean, I also think it's pretty fair for me to have made that selection in advance. So, this week's movie is Psycho Vixens.
Oh God.
What?
That was a good oh God. You know, an excited one?
You've been a bit of a little Miss Sassy Pants lately, Nurse. I'm not so sure that I'm as much into that as you think I am, but I digress. Psycho Vixens comes from writer John Arnaldi and director Peter Perry Jr., and it's really known by two names. I know it as what the Internet Movie Database lists it as, which is Psycho Vixens. However, and somewhat interestingly, most references made to it on YouTube and elsewhere is for the other name, The Young Psycho Girls. In fact, that's what you're going to see on the screen when this movie begins. But what I find really fascinating, at least to me, is that neither title really accurately tells you what to expect for this movie. One title sounds like a Russ Meyer movie, the other sounds like a coming-of-age movie. And if you've never seen this movie, whoa boy, do you have some surprises coming. Now, writer and co-director Arnaldi didn't really do much. This was one of only 3 screenplays that he wrote, and he does have a 4th credit for a story. He seemingly was well-versed in exploitation and drive-in kind of fare. In fact, one movie he made as an assistant director before Psycho Vixens is called Jailbait Babysitter. I don't know much about that movie, but I can venture a guess between the title and the poster that it was made for local school marms and librarians. But Arnaldi was pretty much finished with movies by the end of the 70s. I don't know if he found other interests, got new friends, or something else, but 1979, the year after this movie, that saw the release of The Last of the Blue Devils, the Kansas City jazz story, which was a documentary about jazz musicians from the Prohibition era, basically reuniting to play some tunes and talk about their lives. And it's a movie that's seemingly well revered. Now, Arnaldi must have been a music fan because one of his 2 miscellaneous crew credits beyond the 1970s was for tour merchandising for a Stevie Nicks live concert video in 1987. Now, as for Peter Perry Jr., he had a little bit of a longer career, kind of spanning back to the late 50s or so, but he was pretty much out of the business as a director by 1980. However, he did have a few editing credits working in the adult industry into the 80s. In fact, he won an award for editing Dixie Ray Hollywood Star. Now, Dixie Ray is a movie that I'm pretty familiar with. It was one of a month-long celebration of old school blue movies that I did at the blog bmovieenema.com. Nailed it. You owe me $1. I was able to say the website title twice in the opening segment, so pay up, Nurse. But notice something here. Arnaldi seemed to work mostly in exploitation, and Perry also worked in adult films. Not only that, but Perry seemed to specifically work in cheeky kinds of comedies and what have you. Now, he did a couple of thrillers or horror films, but mostly it was adults only kind of fare. He was definitely part of the nudie cutie phase with his movie Mr. Peter's Pets. Now, nudie cuties were movies that were being made around the same time as nudist colony pictures. It was a way for people who wanted to make movies that had naked women in them to work around some of the censorship codes and what have you that was going on prior to the rating system that we know now. Now, nudist colony films or naturist films were mostly kind of docudramas, or at least documentary in nature, and then they would include some drama. Now, nudie cuties, though, were a different breed. People just made them. Most of the time they were comedies, and it was usually some hapless dope of a dude who would come across glorified women with huge bazoombas. I think most people thought they were pretty dumb, but at the same time, no one thought these were anything but these kind of silly little cheeky comedies. Anyway, Nurse, do you know what my favorite movie title of Perry's is?
Nope. Which one?
Well, it's Knockers Up. I mean, look at this poster. That's amazing. But do you like nudie cuties?
Oh yes. I have a whole collection of them on Blu-ray.
Oh, no shit. Well, I know what our plans are going to be after this. I think we need to pick up a bunch of cheap booze, maybe get a bag of hamburgers or something, and I don't know, just maybe go back to your place and watch some of them. Well, let's dive into the first part of Psycho Vixens, and we'll be here after that first segment, and we'll talk some more about stuff, I guess. So let's get cruising. Alrighty, so we have met our trio of young ladies, Pris, Sheila, and Sherry, and they're motoring down the highway from Colorado to California, and they're young, looking for fun, and basically just looking for something to get over their teenage boredom. So Sheila and Sherry are sisters who have a seemingly pretty cool dad, but he's a little bit concerned about them driving all the way out about 1,000 miles, especially because Pris is completely inexperienced when it comes to camping and kind of roughing it and stuff, despite the sisters knowing what they're doing. Now, you see what I mean when I say that this seems a little bit like a coming-of-age story? You've got two somewhat crunchy granola chicks with a dad that allows them to grow, but then Pris, who is part of the stuffy family. It's all just kind of lining up to be this fun little romp with these girls, right? Well, you have no idea what's coming. Anyway, this gives me an opportunity to talk about something that we hadn't really talked about that much previously. Now, remember, Nurse, when we did that Werewolves on Wheels?
Yup, that movie was odd. And you don't know shit about music.
Yeah. Anyway, I didn't really get a chance to say too much about the subgenre of biker movies at that time. And in fact, the biker subgenre is really a subgenre of something else. And I guess we should probably start there with the overarching subgenre of exploitation films. Well, what do you say, Nurse? Should we probably kind of dig into that information?
It's a term we've been using on this show, so maybe we should dissect it.
Agreed. So I think it's safe to say that the idea of exploitation films are often either misunderstood or misrepresented. And I think that a lot of people think that exploitation movies are dirty, or they don't provide acceptable depictions of women or people of color or members of the LGBTQ community. But that's not really all that true. Well, I guess maybe that last one, only because of the height of exploitation, was during the time in which gays and what have you were still kind of thought of as being kind of freaky or weirdos or overly flamboyant to cartoonish levels. But exploitation has been part of the movie biz since really early on. In fact, it was likely started within the 20s or so. Remember, this was pre-Hays Code, so a lot of the earlier movies maybe did display nudity or sexual situations or violence in much more explicit terms. After the Hays Code kicked in, well, a lot more restrictions were put in place. Now, this would lean toward the rise of the cautionary films. Films like Reefer Madness, Sex Madness, Child Bride, and She Should Have Said No, and several others were made almost as kind of leaning on the idea of being educational. They were all lurid and most always leaned towards sex fiendishness, and quite frankly, Child Bride is just outright gross. But it could sidestep that censorship of the time. And it was more of a sense of being morally right that these films and these things can be shown to the public. And it's that good old-fashioned double standard when it comes to expressing the moral high ground that loose women, drug-addled men, and whatever the fuck else in between are bad and you shouldn't be like them. Now, there was another way to kind of sidestep that censorship too, and that's to be artistic or foreign. First and foremost, the French were very good at dealing with kind of icky subject matter, at least icky stuff that we wouldn't necessarily touch in America. If something could be successfully argued that it is of higher artistic standard, then it would probably supersede other things like moral censorship. For example, Clockwork Orange has lots of imagery and content that would have been on par with movies playing at the exact same time on 42nd Street in New York City during the kind of height of the grindhouse theaters and such. But, you know, this was Stanley Kubrick, so he had pedigree, and it was shifted to art film status. 10 years before, he did Lolita, about a man lusting after an underage girl, but it crossed over to mainstream art, thanks to having a little bit of studio and established actors kind of backing it. But generally speaking, the term exploitation is a very loose term and is really hard to pin down. Though there are a couple of ways that you might be able to spot if something you're watching is exploitation or not. First, what's in the movie itself? More specifically, what's the level of sex and or violence? If a movie depicts a fairly violent rape, for example, it's very likely going to be instantly labeled as exploitation. But again, it could have some pedigree behind it. If Francis Ford Coppola makes a movie in which a woman is raped and you even see her bits and bobs in the process, it's likely going to be labeled a drama. So pedigree and budget could play heavily and play a huge hand in the determination of what kind of movie you're watching. Now, if we were to separate sex and violence into two separate fields of base attractiveness for an audience of a movie, then we can dig even deeper. A movie that presents a long sequence featuring a woman working in a burlesque show or a strip club, and it makes sure that each of these scenes go on for as long as possible or show as much as possible, and you're, kind of keeping the rest of the plot overly simplistic or completely absent, then you're probably teetering over to the side of exploitation. And about that violence, have you ever seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Nurse?
Yes. That movie is really scary.
Yes, it is. It's scary, but not terribly gory. It is, however, extremely visceral. You can actually feel it. It's a very uncomfortable movie to watch, and it affects you big time. And it goes to a level in its grittiness and visceral kind of explosions of scary and violent scenes that mainstream folks wouldn't have really wanted to touch. And I just picked the two easiest things to point to in terms of deciding if you're watching an exploitation flick or an art film. There are tons of other things that you can look at in terms of quality, budget, trends, especially trends that movies may be trying to follow or cash in on, and so forth. So there are so many sub-genres of exploitation, like giallo, cannibal films, some monster movies, particularly giant monster movies, blaxploitation, mockbusters, disaster films, Nazi-sploitation, Ozploitation, splatter films, women in prison films, revenge films, and yes, biker films. Now, when we come back after the next segment, I'll go into a little bit more of that subgenre of biker films, because it's something that's actually not only was really popular for a long time, but they still kind of are popular. And you can possibly point to elements that made biker films their own subgenre that have bled into lots of other types of movies, like even the Mad Max movies kind of have a biker film feel to them. But I need to rest up, so let's get back to Cycle Vixens, aka the young Cycle Girls, and I'll see you.
How about that warning?
Yes, so pretty much for the rest of the movie, things are going to get kind of dark and include things like rape, violence towards women, and what have you. Now, I want to warn you now so that if you want to just skip ahead on the little bar at the bottom of this video until you see me talking again, you can definitely do so. This is definitely viewer discretion advised. And if, by the way, if you're under 18, how the hell are you watching this anyway? But that's beside the point. Let's get back into the movie. Okay, so that was the part of the movie that I call the shitty shenanigans part of Cycle Vixens. Things took a real fucking dark turn in Act 2, if I should say so myself. The sisters get peeped on by a dim-witted, scary guy in the gas station before he drives off in a beat-up truck. Then Pris nearly gets orally raped by a cop. At least there, Sheila and Sherry kind of came to save the day. Then they meet a girl who seems to almost both not understand but also be jealous of the girl's freedom to venture out on their own. So things, I guess, are getting better, right? Fuck no, they're not getting better. They meet a couple of hippies on the side of the road and they decide to set up camp and hang out with this couple. However, this couple is all about two things: sex, drugs. And they kind of want to get these girls high on whatever they can, either pot or heroin, they do not care which. And they want to fuck. When Pris is all like, I'm not really down with any of that, the dude decides to have his girlfriend trap the sisters in their sleeping bags so he can rape Pris. I guess just for funsies. Now, I don't think I'm a very dumb person.
I think you're very smart.
Oh, thanks, nurse. But I can at least say I'm smart enough to have absolutely no idea any of the stuff that happened in this section of the movie was going to happen the first time I saw it. You don't have a first act of good times and silly comedic bits only for it to turn south quite like that. And what's worse?
This isn't even the biggest surprise.
Exactly. All right, so let's talk about that biker movie subgenre of exploitation, yes? So in 1953, The Wild One with Marlon Brando came out, and it was a massive success. Brando was already an Oscar nominee for A Streetcar Named Desire and Viva Zapata, and was really soon to be in his very quotable Oscar-winning role in On the Waterfront. And he was a superstar and was still relatively new in the business, but everything he was doing was knocking it out of the park. Well, The Wild One was hugely inspirational as well. Even James Dean, an icon himself, bought a Triumph motorcycle to kind of mimic the Johnny character in The Wild One. Elvis, another huge inspiration, used Johnny's image in this huge flick of his called Jailhouse Rock. This was about the time that sideburns became popular for guys, and it pretty much started with Johnny in The Wild One. Hell, even the Beatles took inspiration from this movie by taking their name from the ladies' motorcycle gang, even though that gang spelled Beatles correctly. The leather jacket, the cap, it's all an iconic look. Now, this was the first real counterculture tentpole moment in movies and popular culture. Post-World War II, society seemed to be really riding high. We won the war. We were coming back, having families, and working to move out into the suburbs. Well, not everyone wanted that or was striving for that. Rebellion existed among the youth, and this movie, as well as Rebel Without a Cause, and the rise of rock and roll, was giving kids an opportunity to let it all out. Now, here's something that you really probably should already know about Hollywood by now. When you have a big hit, both culturally and at the box office, like The Wild One, and then with Rebel Without a Cause, when that also hits big, you do whatever you can to kind of keep cranking out those types of movies. You want kids acting up and acting out. You want rebels. You want oodles of rebels. And if they can wear leather jackets and caps like Brando, even better. That's what you'll see for the rest of the 50s and into the earlier first part of the 60s. But then, as the later 60s hit, oh boy, something new came along. Not the good-looking Marlon Brando biker types or the James Dean rebel types. You have scuzzy, dirty, stoner hippies and big, hairy, burly Hells Angels. The biker movies really changed in the later part of the 60s. The biker gangs, which used to be groups of bored or misunderstood youths, were now being depicted as drunk, angry, violent adults. Now, in some of these movies, like Werewolves on Wheels that we watched earlier in the year, they were sort of the protagonists, but they weren't without some issues on their end. In other movies, they were kind of like anti-heroes. In others, they were things to be kind of scared of. And this lasted through the 1970s. Not every biker movie featured burly gang dudes or slutty biker babes. Some, like the incredibly popular Easy Rider, were people looking for something more fulfilling. They were almost hippies, but really just kind of more like good guys who sought to find what America was really about. By the way, Easy Rider would prove to be yet another movie that would inspire a bunch of biker movies and other counterculture movements in the new Hollywood system. Anyway, bikers nowadays would likely either be pretty boys with a dark side or played as a joke that they look tough and scary, but actually good, kind-hearted people and kind of teddy bear-like characters. Maybe of all the different types of exploitation films out there, the biker movie is probably the one that had the most movies made and maybe the longest style running, as they are still making motorcycle movies to this day. So let's get back to the unexpected conclusion of Psycho Vixens, and I will see you after the movie. Well, I wanted to make sure I mentioned Easy Rider in the previous segment because obviously the makers of this movie were Easy Rider fans. Holy shit. Okay, so the first time I saw this movie was a couple years back. This was one of the earliest movies, I think, that played on the Roku channel OtherWorlds TV. Now, we're big fans of that channel around these parts, and I think trying to describe how I experienced this movie is really difficult. I mean, we had this first act that seemed all happy and fun and silly. These girls just want to go see the ocean. What's the big deal, huh? Anyway, then the second act comes along and they run afoul of some creeps. Of course, it's an exploitation film, so there's drugs and shit. But I didn't quite expect the mouth and vaginal rape, though. But okay, they get their bike stolen, right? Well, then they find their bikes and everything seems to be okay again. Yay! These girls get their revenge against the dopers and they're gonna make it all the way to the coast. Fucking A. They find some cool people to hang out with and party with, and they don't seem to want to rape them or steal their shit or hook them on heroin or nothing. And that turns out to be kind of a sweet little scene. Actually, now that I think about it, a lot of shit happens in the last act of this movie. God damn. I mean, with about 20 minutes to go, they deal with Pris getting raped. Well, they barely deal with that. They find their bikes and get their revenge. And then they find the party. And then they get to the coast where they are promptly shot and killed. But I guess that's okay because their ghosts are now frolicking in the ocean. My jaw was on the floor at the end of this movie the first time I saw it. It really feels like two different movies crammed into one 80-minute time frame. It's so dysfunctional and, I mean, really the best word I can find for it is bipolar in its attitudes. And that, I mean, it's just this jarringly fascinating, but also still charming somehow. Like, the girls aren't really all that interesting. They almost have no discernible personality of their own individually. However, they are also not really letting negative stuff get them down. They don't have great bikes to make their trip, but they don't care. They have a blowout. They get it fixed. They don't care. They run into creeps. They get out of it, but they don't let it get them down. And I don't want to say that they are necessarily full of agency, but they want a good time. And motherfuckers, they are going to have a good time, goddammit. But if there's one thing that fun can't outrun,
it's a bullet from an assassin.
That's right. Now, Sainers, I think it's time for us to get out of here. Now, tell them where all the good stuff is.
You can find all of Jeff's writings and upcoming episodes at www.bmovieenema.com. You can follow the page at Facebook and Twitter and check out episodes on YouTube. If you have a Roku, get OtherWorlds TV and check him out along with all the other hosts that appear there on weekends.
All right, thank you, Nurse. Now, next week, it is the season 1 finale, and I'm going to close the loop. We came in with Mario Gariazzo's Eyes Behind the Stars, and we are going to go out with Mario Gariazzo's The Eerie Midnight Horror Show. So, Nurse, let's go cruising on down the road into the finale. Cruising.